On the morning of the 9th of February 1855, the people of mid-Devon awoke to find their homes smothered by a thick blanket of snow. But it soon became apparent that whilst they had been sleeping, some unknown entity had apparently cut a path straight through their county, leaving a mysterious trail where its feet had passed upon the ground. Who or what was responsible for the devil's footprints? But first, a shout out to our sponsor, Surfshark. Given the current socio-political landscape, practically everyone should be using a VPN. What is a VPN? Well, it stands for Virtual Private Network. With Surfshark, all of your web traffic goes through a secure VPN tunnel, your IP address is hidden, and all your data is encrypted. Surfshark is available for all platforms: Windows, macOS, iOS, Android, and many others, and you can use just one subscription to protect unlimited devices. Winner of multiple awards, Surfshark is our personal choice for internet security, as not only is it rich in features, it is one of the most competitively priced VPN services out there. And today, Surfshark is offering an amazing deal for our subscribers only. By going to surfshark.deals/bedtime stories, you can save up to 83% on a 2-year subscription. That's full protection for just over $2 a month, and you get 3 months extra free. With a 30-day money-back guarantee, you can also buy with complete confidence. Head over to surfshark.deals/bedtime stories and grab yourself an absolute bargain. You'll be fully protected online, and you'll also help to support the channel. Before his children had retired to bed the previous evening, John Loosemore had allowed them to look out of the window at the snow falling outside. An easterly wind had been depositing thick flurries of snowflakes onto his land and the surrounding properties for several hours, and as he bade his excitable daughters good night, he promised he would find time to build them a snowman before he left for his shift the following morning. When he awoke several hours later, Loosemore hurriedly dressed before confirming that both girls were still fast asleep in their beds. He was just in the process of pulling on his boots in order to make good on his promise when there was a sudden and loud hammering at the front door. Frowning, John rose to his feet and made his way across to a window to see who was outside. The unexpected visitor to the Loosemore household that morning turned out to be the son of a local farmer, who had been hurriedly dispatched by his mother with orders to fetch the local constable. Inviting the youth inside, John had cautiously listened to the boy's tale before changing into his tunic and reaching for his stovepipe hat. As a result of what he had been told, Constable Loosemore took the liberty of locating a small lead cosh from one of the downstairs cabinets, which he would occasionally use to supplement the official wooden truncheon he had been issued with. He also ordered the boy to build a snowman for the girls outside the front door, ensuring that his fatherly responsibilities were fulfilled alongside those of the wider community. Loosemore was some distance away from the town centre when he had heard the sounds of men shouting. Increasing his pace, the officer hurried down the lane in the direction of the disturbance. Minutes later, he was at the town square to find a small posse of agitated locals assembled there. As he surveyed the various weapons and tools each were brandishing, John found his hand dropping to the cosh in his pocket before he inquired what was transpiring. With some persuasion, the throng parted, eventually revealing the cause of their consternation. There, pressed deep into the snowfall, was a trail of footprints running from one end of the village right through to the other. As he stepped forward for a closer look, Loosemore noted that they appeared to have been caused by the hooves of an animal, rather than those made by a human. When he asked why such a trail should be any cause for excitement, the constable found himself being jostled and shoved in the same direction the tracks were heading. With each subsequent step he took, the realization of what had perturbed the residents slowly began to dawn on him. The footprints he was now following did not stop, even when faced with any form of obstruction. Upon reaching the edge of any building, the tracks would then perfectly recommence on the other side. Where low-lying obstructions such as stalls or laden carts were in the way, the prints travelled up and over them in an unbroken line. Wrestling with the evidence which was being presented to him, Loosemore called for a ladder before clambering up to survey the roof of a nearby single-storey dwelling. When the officer climbed back down, the assembled gathering could see that his face was pale. He explained to them that the tracks had continued across the roof of the building, as if whatever had made them had walked up and over it without a care in the world. A quiet hush now descended upon the gathering, as each person present was caught up in their own thoughts. Someone or something had passed through their village in the night, walking upon hooves instead of feet, in defiance of the laws of nature. And if the rumours were to be believed, this might not be the first time such a visit had taken place. Realising that the local constable may not be the salvation they required, the crowd immediately set off in search of the town priest. The first few weeks of 1855 had been unusually cold, and the southwest of England had been battered and bruised by repeated snowfalls. In the county of Devon, the Exe and Tyne rivers had both frozen over at times, failing to thaw and becoming covered with each successive storm. Hapless residents were almost prisoners in their own homes, with the local roads and pathways rendered completely inaccessible. By early afternoon on the 9th of February, reports had begun to filter through to the Exeter Constabulary that something inexplicable had allegedly taken place during the previous evening. As the day had slowly progressed, a steady stream of riders had arrived from various hamlets and villages dotted along the county's southern coastal path, all wanting to inform the police about a mysterious trail that had been found trodden into the freshly fallen snow. Officers were dispatched to a number of neighbouring towns, later returning to confirm to the borough superintendent that there was indeed an unbroken line of hoofprints which appeared to travel in a path of roughly 100 miles. By the end of the day, reports had been received from over 30 separate locations, all situated along a trail which stretched from Teignmouth right across to Weymouth. Whilst the tracks themselves were unremarkable, resembling a horse's hoof with a width of 2.5 inches, the manner in which they were laid out made little sense to those who encountered them. The pattern which had been left trodden into the snow resembled that of a biped, rather than a horse or any other type of ungulate. The footprints of this mysterious intruder travelled in 2 parallel lines, situated 6 inches apart, with a gap of roughly 8 inches between each of the steps. The technique with which this unknown creature had walked paled into insignificance when compared to the apparently impossible path it had travelled in order to complete its mysterious journey. The owner of the footprints had seemingly been able to traverse fast-flowing stretches of open water with ease, walking vertically up the side of houses and outbuildings, and across the sloping roofs of structures of varying sizes. Nothing seemed to act as an obstruction or barrier to impede this phantom creature's progress. The route taken by the nocturnal visitor was neither linear nor random. In some places, it had travelled up and across man-made structures without a care. In others, there were signs it had deliberately deviated from its path to approach windows or doorways, before then resuming its travel. The investigating officers were also baffled to find no signs of any damage having been caused, or property interfered with at any of the locations they had visited. Whilst bewildering in nature, it appeared that no obvious crime had been committed. Witness testimony in relation to the footprints was dutifully recorded, and incident reports filed, but there was little more in the way of police investigation. As the snows finally began to melt away and the footprints disappeared, wild stories about who or what had created them spread in their wake. For the people living in the communities affected by the incident, There was only one plausible explanation for what had taken place. They believed that the devil himself had risen up from the depths of hell and walked amongst them whilst they slept, his fiery hooves searing a lasting impression in the snow as he passed them by. After all, this was not the first time that Lucifer had paid a visit to Devon. 200 years before, on a cold Sunday morning in October 1638, the congregation of St Pancras Church in Widdicombe was sitting quietly listening to a sermon being delivered by the Reverend George Lyde. All of a sudden, the church was filled with a foul and acrid burning smell, before something came crashing through the roof, sending debris tumbling down onto the assembled parishioners. As the terrified onlookers watched on in horror, a mysterious ball of blinding light suddenly started to hurtle around amongst the throng. It repeatedly bounced and ricocheted off every surface it came into contact with, and collided violently with several of the fleeing worshippers. One of those struck by this manifestation was an elderly lady, who immediately fell to the floor crying out in pain. Those who tended to the woman's injuries as she lay dying would later swear that her clothes had remained perfectly undamaged, despite the catastrophic burns caused to her skin. 2 men also sustained fatal injuries when they were thrown to the ground after the object struck them. Moments later, the large wooden doors to the church crashed open, and the glowing orb vanished. As the terrified worshippers rose to their feet and began to tend to their wounded, it became apparent that one of their number was missing. A young man by the name of Jan Reynolds was nowhere to be seen. Witnesses claimed that immediately prior to the tragedy, Jan had been asleep in his pew, a pack of cards clasped in his hand, which he had been playing with as he had dozed off during the sermon. Rumours quickly began to circulate that it was the devil who had come crashing into the church to claim the soul of Jan Reynolds. Stories emerged of a phantom rider dressed all in black, riding away from the building with the terrified youth slung over his saddle. For many years to come, the fate of the missing teen would be used as a cautionary tale by parents attempting to keep their children in line. In the decades after the mystifying appearance of the devil's footprints, many competing theories were put forward in an attempt to rationalize the phenomenon. And whilst these vary greatly in terms of credibility, none ever managed to successfully explain what had occurred without some degree of doubt. Perhaps the most common theory regarding the footprints is that they were created by some kind of animal. Some have suggested that the trail was made by nocturnal creatures, such as badgers or foxes. They argue that badgers in particular have been known to grow to such a size that their tracks could be seen as comparable to those of a human being, and that a pack of these predatory animals moving around at night in search of food may have been responsible. Another proposition is that something like a rat or mouse could have potentially been the culprit by leaping through the snow. Over time, and facing no small degree of ridicule, these suggestions have gradually been modified to propose that the intruder may have been a kangaroo, escaped from a travelling circus or private collection. Much like the many sightings of big cats on the UK mainland, which we have already covered, there have indeed been similar reports of wild kangaroos and similar large marsupials throughout the British Isles. A slightly more believable explanation would be suggested half a century later by the British novelist Geoffrey Household. The author of Rogue Mail recorded that he had been approached by a man whose grandfather had been working at the Devonport Naval Base at the time of the incident. This man suggested that the true cause of the marks was actually well known to the authorities. The informant claimed that on the evening of the incident, the strong winds that accompanied the snowfall had managed to pull an experimental military balloon free of its moorings at the base. 2 metal shackles had been left dangling behind it, as it had then been subsequently dragged across the countryside by the weather front. Whenever these shackles had made contact with the pristine snow beneath them, be this on the ground or the walls and roofs of buildings, they left behind a pair of indentations that closely resembled hoof prints. Eventually, having now travelled in excess of 100 miles, the balloon had come down to earth near the town of Honiton. Desperate to keep the affair secret, naval officials had paid off a resident whose greenhouse had been demolished by the crashed aircraft. They quickly recovered the debris and took it back to the safety of their base. Given that this explanation is far more credible than that of a leaping field mouse, it is hardly surprising that Household's proposal is the closest the mystery has ever come to an accepted solution. The final proposal is that the marks were caused by an as yet unobserved and undocumented natural phenomenon, such as an extreme weather event. 15 years earlier, a similar trail was discovered which stretched across 12 miles of Loch Lomond National Park. Anecdotal evidence also suggests that there is a small stretch of land on the Polish border with Ukraine, where exactly the same set of tracks are found pressed into the snow on an annual basis. When all is said and done, what are we to make of this haunting tale from Devon's dark and distant past? At the time of its occurrence, the sheer size and scale of the mystery immediately pushed the witnesses into the arms of religious teachings, despite the huge advances in scientific understanding being made throughout the land. Given the large number of locations where witnesses came forward to report the footprints, it is clear that something did indeed take place on that fateful evening. And yet, as much as the infamous Widdicombe thunderstorm was most likely a rare occurrence of ball lightning, it is almost certain that society's undying need for intrigue naturally attributed more mystery to the devil's footprints than was perhaps warranted. There are no recorded images of the tracks, only pencil sketches, and the size of the footprint seems to vary from witness to witness. The reality is that as wild rumours about the devil having stalked the land began to circulate, every ungulate track and trail in the county was inevitably misconstrued as evidence of Lucifer's visit. Stories of footprints travelling up walls under long roofs are probably the product of urban myth or exaggeration, and the vast length of the trail was probably much shorter, with other sets of ordinary hoofprints being added onto the original tracks by witnesses eager to become involved in the rapidly growing legend. And yet the notion of so many people of the day buying into this story, if the evidence was indeed this lacking or this easily explained away, truly beggars belief. As we will go on to see in future episodes, Victorian England was no stranger to myth and mystery. Did the devil, or indeed some form of unidentified cryptid, visit Devon on 2 occasions during the 1800s? Perhaps so. As ever, we leave you to decide for yourselves.